Welcome to the We're Better Together podcast. I'm Ian Stevenson.
And I'm Daniel Orduña. Each month, we're excited to bring you an incredible interview with someone who has experience in facilitating an environment where people work better together.
And each week, we'll share some actionable tips and strategies that you can implement in your daily life to help you function better together, whether it's in your marriage, family, team, workplace, church, or community.
Thanks for spending time with us today. Now let's jump into some content and get better together.
Hey everybody, welcome to the We're Better Together podcast. Great to see you again. You know, we've interviewed all kinds of people on this podcast. We've done professional athletes. We've done leaders of nonprofits. We've done pastors. We've done teenagers that are pulling people together in their school. We've done all kinds of things. But today I'm super excited because today we get to bring in someone from the military. We get to bring in a major from the Marines who's agreed to kind of share some of his story with us. He happens to be my nephew, and I've heard his story, and we thought it would be an encouragement to you. So we're going to welcome on the podcast today, Major Brian Harding. Welcome, Brian. Great to see you, buddy.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with y'all.
Hey, Brian, as we start this thing off, the listeners that are tuning in, can you start in the place by just letting people know a little bit about your story? Where did you grow up? What did life look like for you when you were young? And maybe what are a few of your passions as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm actually the youngest of four kids. Just growing up, a very heavy sports family. So I grew up playing soccer and all kinds of sports, but it was actually soccer that was most interesting to me. And I wanted to play in college. And so I ended up getting recruited to play at the Virginia Military Institute. And that's where I played 4 years there. And really that was kind of the launch point, or really how I became a Marine. Is I was exposed to the Marine ROTC there, and I ended up applying for the Marine scholarship there, and I commissioned out of the Marine Corps or into the Marine Corps in 2011 out of VMI, and then I got married a week after graduation to my wife, Mackenzie, and we have 4 kids now. So 3 girls, a boy, and then another due here in July. And so a full house. I'm currently in Monterey, California at the Naval Postgraduate School. And so I'm gonna graduate here in December. But I've been in for the Marine Corps for 11 years now, and just taking one step at a time as I continue on.
That's awesome. Clearly, some big family stuff in there. You got four of you growing up within your own household. Now you got 5 kids here of your own, with the one coming on the way. What's the age range between your youngest that is to come and the oldest that you have?
Yeah, so my oldest is 8, and then so it goes 8, 6, 4, and 2. My son is the 2-year-old, and then another girl coming here. So
5 of them under 8 here soon. That's wild.
That's right. Yeah, never a dull moment in the house, but it's fun.
Yeah, so we really appreciate you taking the time in the midst of all that to share with our listeners. And Brian, being in the Marines is no joke. We realize that, but I remember you sharing with me how when you first went in your first deployment to Okinawa, you were thrown into a job. Can you talk a little bit about, just share with the audience that transition, and then what are some of the things that you learned in the context of that in terms of trying to get 200 Marines to work together?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was a young leader at the time, so I learned probably more through failure during that season, but I still hold those lessons very close to me even today, and it will carry even further on. But yeah, like you kind of had mentioned, I went to my first tour in Okinawa, Japan, a combat logistics battalion, and originally I had a 12-person shop, 12 Marines that I was the leader for within the battalion. And then a little less than 2 years into it, an opportunity came up for me to be a company commander for the headquarters and service company, which consisted at the time about 270 Marines. And so I was 25 at this point. So to go from sort of a shop of 12 Marines to 270 Marines, which it was a very dynamic company, made up of a lot of different sort of capabilities like combat engineers, heavy equipment mechanics and operators, motor transport mechanics and operators, and then a lot of the staff sections too, like intelligence, personal administration, operation type Marines. And so it was very, and I wasn't really trained necessarily for that. Typically when you're a young Marine officer, you have a specialty. Mine was like supply chain management specialty. And so I was thrown into something that was very, I had not been trained in. And so it was a job for, an experienced logistics officer, probably someone that, should have been in for, about 10 years to get that position. But I was just like within 2 years in the fleet. And so, although it is a very unique opportunity for me, it doesn't really happen for my specialty too much to get that exposure. So I was just trying to, I did the best I can. I knew it was going to be a grind. I knew it was going to be really hard.
I want to interrupt you there for a second, Brian, because I remember when you were first telling me this story, like you had a decision point to make, right? You could have stayed with your 12, or you could have taken on this big challenge of 270 with all these other groupings that you knew. Hard to make that decision. I remember you telling me how you talked about it with Mackenzie, and it would be a challenge, right?
Yeah, exactly. My commanding officer, he asked me, if I was to talk to my wife and if I'd be up for taking this responsibility, because it's pretty weighty. A commanding officer or a company commander, there's a lot of responsibility and weight. You're responsible for everything that company does and fails to do, and so it was something to take very seriously. And so he wanted also to make sure I was fully on board with it with my wife, and my wife and I, we were just like, this doesn't happen very often. And we had a sense that, it was like, because it was so unique, we felt like led, to accept that. And I feel like we would have regretted if we would have passed on that opportunity, and knowing that it was going to be extremely challenging. I think looking back when we would have left, we didn't decide to do it, I probably would have had many more regrets on that end. But super thankful that we took the hard road, and kind of embraced it.
And I know you've learned so many lessons. Like you've learned lessons with 270 that you never could have learned with 12, right? Like you had to learn leadership at a whole nother level with all that. So can you share with our audience, like, what are some of the lessons about helping the different Marine departments that you were kind of overseeing? What were some of the principles and lessons that you would share with our audience that help them work better together in their shop? Like, are there some things that come to mind for you?
Yeah. Several things come to mind, but I kind of want to share really the lesson I learned through sort of my failure in that experience, just because I was so overwhelmed in the day to day that I didn't ever fully, I feel like, get around to the thing that I really wanted to do. And something that I've applied since then. But the first was like, in the day-to-day, it really felt like we were very reactionary to everything that was going on. Just kind of putting out one fire after the next, not really having a long view of things, to be able to have time to make like a good adjustment to the changes or to that were coming up, or to the operations that were coming up, or the requirements. And so one thing, just, when it comes to like working better, I guess, together, or to building a team in a team that's unified, I think it's so important to really have the long view and build out, for in our context, it was, build out a training plan that, that goes out into the future, and kind of back plan from that, to give sort of the Marines a picture of what was ahead, what were the key, like, critical events and points that they can kind of work towards, and give them the opportunity, the time and space to equip themselves personally, or as a section, that they could, each of the section leaders or the platoon leaders could know sort of these critical events that we had in the future, and they could build their plans off of that. But I feel like I didn't do a very good job of really clearly painting that out into the future, and saying, hey, these are our priorities, as we, these are our priorities in the next year. And these are the key things that we can't fail on, or these are the key events that we need to be very intentional about preparing for and being ready for. And I think that would have really helped create less friction in the day-to-day, because when you don't have that clarity of what's ahead, you're just kind of reacting on what the big thing is that happened that day. And that builds a lot of frustration within your team, and it breaks the unity.
That's good.
So good.
You've listened to our podcast. I know you've heard us talk about the focus, adjust, persevere kind of cycle of unity. And what I'm hearing you just reiterate it with different words, with that long view thing, is focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to have that focus on what it's all about, where you're going. And then along the way, you do have to react, you can adjust. But it's coming back to that focus that really helps congeal everybody together, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I hear a lot in there too of vision, mission, plan, communication, the value that has, and clarity that you just said there too, Brian. Just some other words in there that I think we've heard a lot about from people that we interview, or some of the 10-minute tune-ups that we do on some Mondays. But that was well laid out in terms of what you were sharing within that. Brian, something came to mind for me too. You were mentioning in part of your story just about who you are and growing up, playing soccer, playing 4 years in college. And for you, sometimes we talk about people as being natural born leaders. Sometimes people grow into leadership. Did you experience any kind of leadership in the soccer playing that you did with those teams, or no?
Yeah, I did. And I kind of, I kind of adjusted kind of how I did leadership throughout those times. But in sort of the roles that I was filling, but definitely in high school, just being a captain, the soccer team, you have that position. But I really feel like, there was the majority of the time I wasn't necessarily the actual positional leader, but there was, leadership isn't necessarily, it's not position solely, right? And so the leadership is really influence that you have on others, and you can do that in whatever role or position that you're in. And so I took that pretty seriously in the teams that I was on, just kind of being a person of character, trying to be above reproach, and just how, just how I deal with people, work with people, trying to be a good teammate, just being encouraging, never quitting, work ethic. And so just trying to kind of set an example, just in how I, live day to day, I felt like was, especially during the times where I played competitive sports, I wasn't as vocal, necessarily, but I tried to kind of live it out. I think the vocal aspect is necessary, and it needs to come. But during my sort of developmental years as a leader, I tried to live it out as much as I could.
So good. I want our listeners to really grab a hold of what Brian was just sharing there. When thinking about leadership on so many different levels, and we think about being better together, yeah, you need some people at times to be vocal. You also need people that are modeling it in an example and how they're doing it. And I really love what you were stating there about this idea of leadership being influence. And I really hope our listeners can take that away. Yes, there were times where you were in position in team sports of being a captain. There are times where you weren't. Then you found yourself in this situation in the Marines. But there were things that you picked up as a young person that then played out in terms of when this role came upon you, this ask came upon you of, hey, you were already someone that was thinking about integrity and discipline and setting an example for others. And I would guess that played a role when this opportunity arose for overseeing over 200 Marines. So listeners, really grab a hold of that. You can have influence even if you're not a captain, even if you're not the team leader. You still have a role in leadership.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just add to that I think is, I guess, a powerful point that that can carry a lot of weight or increase your influence is just showing authenticity. Just being true to who you are, and obviously, like, if you have some areas that some weak points that are not healthy, or those need to be worked on. We're always growing and learning, but that was one thing. Despite my tremendous lack of experience in that role as a company commander, I think one thing that helped curve maybe some of the lack of my experience was just being very authentic with the Marines that I led, and trying to engage with them, and then just being real and not being someone that I wasn't, and try to encouraging them, building them up, reminding them, yes, this is hard, and I'm sorry for maybe some of the the things that they're going through because of the lack of maybe us leaders is maybe not doing things the right way or painting the picture, but just being authentic with them went a long way, I think.
And no, I love your humility, Brian. It's something it actually bleeds through the screen here a little bit. I know you and I know that's just how you're wired up, but that's been a common theme we've heard as well on creating a better together environment requires humility, and even you talking about the mistakes you made at that first when you were the company commander, and then I know you went back to the U.S. and you actually had a different job, and you carried a lot of the lessons you learned in that company commander role to what you did next. Can you maybe share with our listeners how you took some of what you experienced there, maybe some of those mistakes that you felt like you made with being reactive and not looking forward, and how that translated to your next role?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a huge just period of growth for me, just that year of experience. And what I would encourage the listeners and just every leader, or really anyone, is just the value and importance of reflection, especially when you go through a really challenging time, or even just take some time to just reflect in your life. What are the things that or the things that really stick out, and maybe from a spiritual side, what has God been kind of teaching you and sharing you on along your journey? But So that this period, I really reflected a lot. I wanted to capture all the things that sort of I was learning during that time, and then put them into practice with the new team that I had. So I ended up being an instructor at ground supply school, and so hundreds of Marines are coming through there. Young enlisted Marines get their training for their specialization and then go out into the fleet to their first units. And then so for me, I was an instructor for the officers, and I also led a team of senior enlisted instructors that taught all the privates, the PFCs, the young Marines coming through. And so one thing that I really wanted to do differently was engage with the instructors at a deeper and personal level. I knew that if I could leverage really get to know them and pull the best out of them, they're the ones that are going to be touching and in daily interaction and contact with hundreds of Marines that are going to be flowing through the schoolhouse and out to the units. And so I kind of had this vision of like the impact that we could have of being able to engage with all these lives, right? All these young Marines, and how we can shape and influence them before that, for the rest of their careers. And so the first thing that I was very, very adamant about doing is getting to know my people really well by asking questions. And so I brought each instructor in one-on-one, and just was very, I allotted an hour just to connect with them, to understand their background, to really know them, and to be fully present in conversation with them. And from the beginning, not a couple of months down the road, when I was there, but from the beginning, because that's something that I didn't feel like I had enough time or energy. I was overwhelmed, in my previous job. And so but I made it a priority this time. And I received so much good feedback from the instructors. Some of them were like, this is the first time someone has ever, sort of counseled me in this way or had a conversation like this. And so that proved to be pretty powerful. And then the clarity aspect of how do we create more clarity and really also buy-in, right, to the opportunities that were in front of us with the hundreds of Marines that are going to be under our leadership when we're here. And so something I did was I brought all the instructors in. I would say it's like between 10 and 15 instructors, and really just brainstormed together, brought in their ideas, all their experiences. These are experienced Marines. They've been in, a lot of them have been in 10, 15 years, even more so than me, or more experienced than me. And we just kind of mapped out, hey, this is sort of the vision for our company. This is these are the values that we want to sort of live by and also work from. And these are the key goals that we want to achieve while we're here. And so really getting everyone's input and insight and letting everyone be a part of the process of building that out. Vice me, just because I had an idea in my head of what we, I guess, should be focusing on or what the opportunities were ahead, but giving them an opportunity to shape that and to be a part of it. It was much more, just like rewarding, and also it helped create more buy-in for them, because they're going to be the ones that are every day going to be engaged with these young Marines, and mentoring them, teaching them, instructing them. So they were kind of like the key ones to really impact. And that was my focus.
When we think of the Marines and we think of the military, Daniel, what do we think of? Like some sergeant, captain guy coming in and just telling everybody what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. You better listen, you better obey, and getting in their face and yelling at them. And I'm not hearing that at all from Brian. Like Brian, like the whole approach you just described is totally about being better together. And I understand in military situations, sometimes command and control is what's needed. But in order to create a strong company, you receive the input from everybody. You got them working together. And that is really why I wanted to interview you, because I think so many people think of military, they think of one way that it's always done, but they don't understand that we have incredible leaders like you in there that are really helping our military be better together, not just better. And so, man, that was just such a perfect story, huh, Daniel?
Yeah, within that, I heard a lot of equipping in a lot of sense of when we think better together. Brian just explained a lot of also the sharing and giving off of ownership. Yep. Hey, if we can equip at this level, they can then also equip down at this level and then down at this level. And we have a far better reach when it's not just all in the hands of just Brian, let's say. And he's the one that's carrying the entire weight. I heard the opposite of that. Obviously, what you said, Ian, sometimes someone has to make a decision with certain things, but I love that aspect of the equipping and ownership that was given off. And Brian, as we wrap this whole thing up and we think about this amazing conversation that we just had, what comes to mind for you of the one thing you really want our listeners to take away today? The one thing you would love to leave them with as they think about their own lives, their own circles of influence, and how they can be better together. What would you love to share with them?
Yeah, something that comes to mind that I think can really apply just in your day-to-day, whether, in your neighborhood or in your family or even at your workplace, is that, and I'll give you kind of two words that kind of tie in together, but proximity and presence. I say that because when you want to achieve something together, that unity is so important, and influence is so important to get people to do something maybe that is hard. When you have proximity and presence, what that does, that increases your influence with others, right? And I mean, I think we've all had it, just been with people that like they're fully present with you, like they're really listening, and they that makes you feel good. And also, like, you've been in conversations where you're talking to someone and they are not there, they are in a whole nother world thinking about something else, and that their influence on you kind of is lost. And so more and more, we're kind of just within our family seeing the power of proximity and presence just in our neighborhood. And just something as simple as just sitting outside, being visible, being present and available, that proximity with others, in those daily interactions, in the small interactions that you have, what that does, it creates a space and for conversation and collaboration to happen, and it creates an opportunities for just new ideas to come and to flow, and it creates and that may be a launching point to something new that you can do together, whether it's in the neighborhood or whether it's in the family. But when you don't have that proximity, that close proximity, or being present with people, just think about all the missed opportunities, right? That are there. And so I think just as a leader in whatever, especially as a leader, when you can get so caught up in the busyness of the daily tasks and the mission, which was my case, my first, as that company commander for those 270 Marines, I got so bogged down in my work that I wasn't really out and about and really seeing those Marines and interacting with them in a more frequent way. But if I were, I think I would have, there'd have been greater influence, and I could kind of seed those values or help alignment even more with, hey, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And I think that makes a big difference, proximity and presence.
So good, Brian. So much wisdom there, bro. And thank you for sharing your experience. I was actually thinking about when this podcast is going to drop. It's going to be the first Monday in November, just before Veterans Day. Man, this is perfect timing. And we want to thank you not only for this podcast, but thank you for your service. And thank you for just all the Marines that you're influencing. And we are so grateful that we have leaders like you in those kinds of roles. So what a privilege to have you on today. We appreciate you taking the time. We just really want to thank you so much, man, for all you're doing.
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, just thanks for having me, and also just for what you're doing, and just helping people learn about, a very important topic that we all need to pursue.
We need to stay on top of it, right? Because we forget.
That's right.
All right, brother. Well, you have a great day, man. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, man. Bye.
Bye.
So good. Thank you again, Brian, for the giving of your time to do so. And I think, Ian, two things that really stuck out to me. One, that sense of learning from failures, admitting failures and learning from it was definitely one thing that stood out to me from what Brian was sharing. Hey, when he went from 12 to over 200, one of the early things he said was, hey, one of the things I actually want to go to is that I learned from failure.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing, I think, for people to take away. And I think the second one for me, and I'm sure someone has said this along the lines, but it's now going to be taped. So if I can take this quote, it's great. But I think one of the best gifts that we can give is our authentic self, was something that I essentially heard him share within that. And it has there's deep meaning and value to that. So I think for me, those were two that really stood out. What about for you, Ian?
Yeah, I love how he closed with proximity and presence. For all our listeners, if you take nothing else away from this conversation, those two words are gold. Think about where you're fighting for unity. How can you increase your proximity and presence with them? Maybe it's more eye contact. Maybe it's more time. Maybe it's sitting in your front. Whatever it is, think about how you can increase that. We're so grateful for all of you that tune in and are listening and are fighting for unity in your families, your marriage, your community. Please keep it up. Let's create a wave throughout this country of people trying to be better together. We need it. And we're so glad you're a part of it. So if this has been helpful to you, please share it with other people. If you've got ideas for people for us to interview, shoot them our way. You can reach Ian at We Are Trellis, and Daniel. What's your email again, Daniel?
You can reach me at daniel@narrativecostamesa.com.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much. Have a great day.